Welcome to week 9. This week you turned in your multimodal remix of your research paper. Now we pivot into the final project for this course, which is all about primary research. You can watch the other video this week for the assignment introduction. Here we'll go over primary research and archives. So you read about primary research in the ballpoint articles this week, where they describe various ways that you can collect primary research ethically. So people can sometimes get primary and secondary research confused. So an easy way to remember the differences between them is to think about how many steps you are from the source. So with primary research, you're looking at the original source or the original data. Secondary research has a step in between the original data and you. There's a step between the unedited, unfiltered content and the final product. So a documentary is a secondary source with the original clips recorded as primary research or primary sources. In a journal article about a study, the study is the primary source and the journal article is a secondary source. You probably looked at a mix of primary and secondary sources in your research paper, so you're familiar with both of these already. We've talked about ethics a number of different times throughout this course, and those conversations don't stop when it comes to primary research. In fact, some people may argue that you need to pay even more attention to ethics when conducting primary research because you have the most potential to harm people in primary research if you don't do it properly. The ballpoint reading talks about the Belmont report, where you should be conducting primary research with respect for the people involved in your research, beneficence, and justice. Respect is pretty basic. Make sure people have the ability to make their own choices and protect them. Beneficence in the research sense means that you as the researcher are actively looking for ways to protect the well-being of research participants. Justice is a concept you're likely familiar with, and in research, it means that the participants are getting what you promised to them. If something doesn't happen, like compensation, or if something extra happens, like emotional damage, then it's your responsibility as the researcher to make sure that that participant receives justice. There are also ethics in journalism listed, and we can adopt those into our academic research too, because they're pretty similar to the Belmont report. So be honest with your participants and with your findings, minimize harm for your participants by treating them with respect, avoid any situations that place you in a conflict of interest, and be accountable and transparent with your work. Now, in this project, you're creating an archive. This is a concept that wasn't discussed in nearly as much depth in the ballpoint readings outside of a mention in the artifact analysis section. So let's get into it. An archive generally is a collection of things that hold meaning. You heard this definition in the assignment introduction. But these can be digital or physical materials depending on the content of the archive itself. If we think about academic discourse as a series of conversations, then it makes sense for us to think about archives similarly. Archives are there to tell a story, to let us imagine a moment from the past. There's a video uploaded in this week's readings that really exemplifies the importance of archives, which comes from the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library. The video quality itself isn't great, but it is a really great presentation. I've seen it probably 3 or 4 times now in person. My boyfriend loves the Abraham Lincoln Museum and Library, so anytime we're in Central Illinois, we go. But Ghosts of the Library, as the presentation is called, still gives me chills every time. So I strongly recommend the Abe Lincoln Presidential Museum and Library if you're ever in Central Illinois. Now, the definition of an archive sounds pretty straightforward, but there's actually more thought and more nuance that go into creating one. It's not just tossing everything into a repository, right? So how do we decide what things to collect? Because you can't keep everything, right? So how do you decide what to collect? And who decides what things hold meaning, right? If part of our definition of an archive is that it has enduring value, who decides that? there aren't really straightforward answers for those questions. It's sort of a similar idea to when people say, like, the victors write history, right? The winner writes the story. Whoever's in charge of the archive makes the choices about what to include. It's important then that archivists spend time thinking and reflecting and listening to others about what has the most meaning or what has the most enduring value, right? You have to get those outside perspectives. And this is another situation where the audience is important. If archivists just put in content that they think is interesting without thinking about what materials might speak to a broader theme or experience or idea, then the archive itself loses meaning and purpose. In your last project, you thought about how to design something for an audience, and you considered how your audience might access the content that you created. So you can take that same approach when developing an archive. What will my audience use? What do they need? How will they access it, right? As far as making connections go, conducting research ethically, especially in primary research, will help to ensure that we maintain credibility as writers and as researchers. Primary research and archives can be a way for us to look at the past and get guidance, inspiration, or direction about what to do in the present and the future. So that's it for archives this week. As you start to compile your own, you'll really want to make sure that you take the time to reflect and be intentional with what materials you can include in your archive. And as always, if you have questions, you can post on the Catch-All discussion board, send me an email, or set up an appointment with the Writing Center.